So in the last chapter, we saw that when we still have a mobile vehicle, the mobility was the best security that we had. We got a gun out of the vehicle and into the fight, so we had security actually being provided by rounds going down towards the enemy. Now, the other things we want to consider with regards to whether we take shots from inside the vehicle or we take shots from the outside is what degree of mobility we actually do have. So if our vehicle actually is immobilized and we can't reverse out of there and we have immediate threats that we need to engage, we need to be aware of the very specific steps that we need to take so that we can maximize security, stay mobile, while also minimizing our silhouette. So what's going to happen is we're going to be inside this vehicle, we're going to have contact to our front, and we're going to begin a bailout to the rear movement. Now, this is a pretty straightforward technique, but there's a lot of room for tactical hiccups to take place where there could be miscommunication, there could be weapons malfunction, there could just be overwhelming stimulus that will throw shooters off of what's going to happen. This is the technique that I think is the best way to teach it so that we have a conceptual foundation to fall back on. And when it turns into pickup basketball in the real world, we can just roll with the punches. But this is the way I think it is the best way to teach how to do a bailout and movement to the rear exercise. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have contact to the front. We've got an immobilized vehicle. We have immediate threats we need to engage through the windshield. Now again, obviously the criteria for engaging through the windshield is the distance to the target and whether or not we think that our rounds are going to have effective hits if we send enough of them downrange. We're then going to proceed to bail out of the vehicle and make movement towards the rear. Now this is where there's a little bit of a hang up on regards to what's the best thing to do. I think the best thing to do is to pull security from this immediate wedge position right here before exiting the vehicle so you can ensure that you have a gun facing towards the threat while one team member starts to make movement towards the rear of the vehicle. As we make movement towards the rear of the vehicle, we're going to go from the dirty side where we receive contact to the clean side back here in the rear and grab a new piece of terrain and engage any threats that we have remaining and start to make a decision with regards to whether or not we're going to keep bounding to the back, bounding left or right, or if we're going to assault through the enemy. So let's go ahead and walk through this dry and see what it looks like. When the driver goes to get out of his side of the vehicle, his movements are going to be very similar, but there's going to be a slight change. Now when the driver goes to exit the vehicle, he's going to bring the gun up in a very similar fashion, and the only difference is going to be that he's going to transition the gun from his right shoulder over to his left shoulder. So if he's a right-handed shooter, he's going to do a strong to support side transition. It's important that he does this because it delays the amount of time that his gun is not in the fight. If he tries to stay with the gun seated in his right shoulder and stay in that kind of a configuration, it's one, probably not going to happen with regards to range of motion, and two, it's just going to be slower with him getting the gun into and out of position. So he wants to deliberately transition that gun from strong to support side. When he goes to kick the door open, he's going to take up this hasty security position in the wedge here between the door frame and this part of the body right here. And it's going to look something like this. Danny's going to bring the gun up. He's going to take a string of 5 to 7, maybe 10 shots. We're not going to try to dump the entire magazine here. We're not trying to finish the fight from right here. This is a bad spot. We know that we want to send some kind of security downrange with regards to bullets, and we also want to start to think about getting mobile. When he goes to exit the vehicle, he's going to go ahead and transition the gun from a strong side to a support side while kicking the door open and pinning it in place. Once he's got the door open and pinned in place, he's going to pull up into his hasty security position right here, where his muzzle is now clear from the windshield. And if there were any targets that weren't in his immediate field of view, or maybe they were off at distance and weren't going to have positive impacts with regards to shooting through a windshield, he's going to go ahead and take those shots from right here. Now, when Danny and I are both pinned up in this hasty security position right here, traditionally what guys are taught is that the driver should make movement towards the rear first, and the person in the passenger seat, which is typically the leadership position, should go ahead and hold what they got. We want to think about this though with regards to what happens in the real world. With this particular layout, we've got a dirty side up front on the front side of the vehicle, and we've also got a dirty side over here somewhat to the right side of the vehicle. So if I were to stay here and try to pull security, it might not make the most sense for me to try and be the element pulling security when I should probably think about getting mobile and minimizing my silhouette and looking for a new piece of terrain at the back side of the vehicle. So what would actually make more sense in this particular situation is if we make the decision to bail out to the rear, if Danny were to pull security first, and then I were to begin to make movement towards the rear of the vehicle. Now, when I get outside of this vehicle, I do not want to stand upright like this. What tends to happen when guys run exercises like this is because they're wearing kit, they're tired, they've been hunched over inside the vehicle. When they go to get outside of the vehicle, they stand straight up like this. We want to make sure that we're minimizing our silhouette to some degree so that we can still keep our gun in the fight if we need to, but we're not just completely standing upright. Another thing we want to consider too is if for some reason we didn't have our windows down and we had glass right here, there's no problem with staying low and maximizing what ballistic protection we do have in this door panel, and realizing that if we need to take a shot through this side paneling right here, this side window paneling, we can go ahead and make that happen. But we want to avoid standing straight up like this. Now, when we go to make our peel back to the rear of the vehicle, what we also want to consider is staying low along the side of the body of the vehicle right here. Too often guys will just come straight up, stand up, and they'll peel off and around to the side of the vehicle here, and they'll completely overshoot with their movement. They'll add a lot of unnecessary movement coming back here towards the rear of the vehicle, when in reality they can get low and they can stay pretty low without overexposing their silhouette. Another thing to consider is whether or not you keep your eyes towards the enemy. In this particular situation, I've got a buddy pulling security for me, so I'm gonna haul ass as quick as I can. I'm gonna go ahead and make movement over here as quick as possible. Consider keeping my silhouette minimized, and I'm gonna take up a security position from back here on this side of the vehicle where I know I can pull security and I can shoot. Now, something to consider is sectors of fire. Because Danny is on the left side of this vehicle, I don't want to be randomly spraying off in any direction. I want to be able to cover down for him if he doesn't have a shot and he is moving, but I don't want to wildly be spraying because now I've got him in front of me. So it's very important that I understand where my responsibilities are or where I need to pick up the slack if that's not taking place. Once I get set in this position back here, I would call a verbal command of set, but if Danny doesn't hear that because this is the initial ambiguity of a gunfight, this is an ambush, he would begin moving anyways because he hears my gun get back into the fight. Now, from Danny's position over there, he's gonna work what security he's got. There's, some schools of thought with regards to whether or not he should stay inside the vehicle or if he should actually get out and get in some kind of a crouched over position like this. That's just gonna be a situation dependent thing. If you have time to get outside of the vehicle and you can still pull security, cool, make that happen. But what tends to happen is guys try to get out of the vehicle and now there is a few second delay where there's no security being pulled in a very dangerous situation where fractions of seconds start to really add up as penalties. So if he can get outside of the car and keep the gun oriented downrange, so go ahead and do that right now, Danny. If you can get out of the car right now, we can see he had a little bit of trouble getting out. He's going slow, this is a dry run, but this is also something we want to think about with regards to if we're doing this at night, if we're exhausted. What is the amount of lag time between him getting into this position right here versus, the amount of security he'd be able to pull. Let's do this at full speed dry. But before we do that, let's think about some of the things we want to consider when we perform this exercise. Communication is very important. I know it's really sexy to not talk to any of your teammates and to be a high-speed group of guys that can really minimize the amount of communication you have. But let's think about this with realistic application. If you're working with a hodgepodge group of patrol officers that are actively trying to find an active shooter, or you're thrown together with some guys in your department that you don't typically work with on some kind of crisis response, I think it's very important that we are upfront with our communication, and this helps us establish command and control and just make sure everyone is on the same page. After that, if it turns into pickup basketball, we've at least set the foundation so that guys know what the tentative game plan is before we make any other decisions. Another thing to consider too is that if we mess up doing this, we want to mess up aggressively. Too often, natural tactical hiccups will take place where a gun will have a mechanical malfunction or we'll have a little hiccup with our brain with regards to what's supposed to happen next. If there is a lull in the fight, if there is a lull in pulling security, if both guys are staying static, someone needs to take charge and be decisive. If both parties start to move instead of pulling security, you need to move aggressively and mess up aggressively and get to your next fighting position that you can go ahead and pull security from, read the terrain, and possibly change the fight in your favor. All right, let's go through this at speed. So I would already have my gun postured in this position right here as if I was going into a high threat environment. I'm looking for an active shooter. We're possibly doing officer recovery, but I want to have this gun in a position where I'm ready to use it. If our vehicle is immobilized and we have an immediate threat, we have some kind of ambush that's kicking off and taking place and we're sucked into it, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up and get it into the fight. And again, I'm going to seat it up to the degree that I need to with regards to getting a sight picture. I'm not worried about perfectly seating it in the pocket of my shoulder. And I'm going to go ahead and get that sight picture and engage the target and make the call contact front. At this time, Danny's already going to receive stimulus from the environment because we're seeing the same thing. And he's going to get his gun into the fight too. When we go to make the bailout of this vehicle, that decision and that call should still be made even though we both know that's what's taking place. This ensures that we're on the same page and makes sure that we have command and control of the situation, and we're not going to get lost in the sauce and try to fight out, the ambush from inside our vehicle, and it makes sure that we keep momentum going and we don't stay static for too long. So once we get our guns into the fight here, we're going to go ahead and open our doors, making sure that we're pinning them open. As a passenger, I'm just going to do a simple transition from one side of this pillar to the other so that now I'm no longer obstructed by windshield. I can take longer shots. I've got a greater field of view with where I can pull security. Danny's going to do the same thing, but he's going to transition from his right side to his left side. He's going to kick the door open, and he's going to take up this hasty security position. Now, right here, where there's potential for some confusion, is who calls what command for who goes to the rear first. As we discussed with this particular scenario, we've got a dirty side up front on the vehicle, we've got a dirty side over here on the right. It would make the most sense for me to make the call, hey, move into the rear. Now, again, if this is something that gets messed up or there's a hiccup where we both make the movement to the rear because maybe we're so amped up and we're excited, we're gonna mess up aggressively and we're both gonna move. But I'm gonna make the call, moving, and make movement back to the rear. I'm not going to overexpose my silhouette. I'm going to exit the vehicle. I'm going to try to stay as low as possible while making movement back to the rear. Again, I'm making movement with my back towards the threat because I've got a buddy that's pulling security for me. Once I get set, if I forget to yell set or if it's too loud and my buddy doesn't hear it, and he hears my gun start to talk, that'll be his cue for making movement back to the rear. What we want to remember with this particular technique is that once we get momentum going, it is very important to keep moving. Too often what happens is guys will have a jam inside the vehicle or there'll be miscommunication and they'll just stay static. If you are in a kill zone where every single inch has been measured against you for maximum lethality, you do not want to stay static. You want to get mobile. Now we're going to go hot and you're going to see this at speed. All right, so we're going to do this live. Something to consider is when you're shooting with two carbines from the inside of the vehicle through a windshield, our natural sympathetic response from our eyes is going to be to shut them. We want to make sure that we keep them open so we can actually see what's going on with the target and we're not just blindly firing down range. The other thing that could happen is you just close your eyes and you're not really tracking where your muzzle's going, and now all of a sudden you and your buddy have some cross coverage going on that might be a little dangerous inside the car. All right, let's stand by to go hot. All right, shooters ready, stand by. Ambush! Move to the rear! Set! Set! All right, coming up. So we can see that we want to be very deliberate, we want to be very quick. We want to see where we can pull security and whether or not that makes the most sense with regards to whether or not we're staying static or we're staying aggressive and moving out of our position. Now, there's a lot of different ways that this drill could have natural stress included to where guys are thrown off because they go to shoot through the glass, now they're disoriented, they're amped up because of the drill, maybe there's miscommunication. But again, we want to remember that if we mess up, let's mess up aggressively. Communication is very important. It's sexy to be on a team where no one talks to each other, but it takes a long time to get to that point. Realistically, if you're in a department and there's an active shooter situation, well, there's multiple active shooters, you're probably gonna be thrown together with guys that you haven't trained with on a regular basis, and communication needs to be key so that there's some kind of command and control. If we have some kind of jam on the gun or immediate or remedial action, we don't want to stay in one position and try to fix it. Again, we want to mess up aggressively and get moving to the next spot where we can have a better piece of ballistic protection and get to a clean side of the vehicle.